2 seats. That's it. That's all that stands between Canada and the most powerful negotiating position it's had with Washington in decades. Not 2 provinces, not 2 parties, 2 seats in 3 by-elections on April 13th.
But that's not the only story, because out of nowhere comes Doug Ford, the progressive conservative premier of Ontario, a man who has built his entire career fighting Ottawa and opposing federal Liberals at every turn. Well, he's now saying that he hopes the Bloc Québécois does not win in Terrebonne, because, in his words, he believes in a strong and united Canada.
So, when a conservative premier says that out loud, well, that's not a political statement. That's an alarm going off. That is a man looking at what Donald Trump is doing to this country's economy and saying, hey, this is bigger than politics. But it's also a man who is looking at his federal party and saying, maybe we're better off with the other guys.
Now that is where the insanity starts. So let's get into it, everyone.
3 little by-elections. That's how this gets sold. 3 local races, low turnout, not much to see here. But in a parliament where Mark Carney is sitting just shy of a majority, these are not sleepy side quests. These could decide whether Canada walks into a trade fight with Donald Trump looking steady or looking like it still needs to count heads before it can tie its shoes.
And that is the part that people really miss. Normally, by-elections are where voters go to grumble a bit, kick the tires, send a message, and then go home. But right now, Canadians are not exactly in a playful mood. The world feels unstable, the United States feels less like a trusted partner and more like a neighbor who keeps revving a chainsaw at midnight, and that changes how people vote.
Canadians are in what pollsters are calling a precarity mindset. So in plain English, what that means is that people feel the world is shaky. It's out of their hands and risky. And when people feel that way, they usually do not vote for drama. They vote for the thing that looks least likely to make their mortgage, their groceries, or their job situation worse.
Yep. It is not that voters suddenly fell in love with politics. Nobody's writing poetry about the House of Commons, I don't think anyway. It's that when the outside world looks chaotic, people stop treating elections like a place to vent and start treating them like a place to hold the line.
And that's why these 3 races matter more than they normally would. The Liberals are sitting at 170 seats. They are too short of a majority. Win enough of these and Carney gets a government that doesn't have to negotiate every single vote like he's haggling over the last used snowblower on Facebook Marketplace.
And that matters because the bigger story here is not really just the by-elections. It's what comes after. CUSMA talks, tariff fights, the ongoing economic pressure from the United States. Doug Ford, of all people, is out there in Texas basically making the case that Canada needs certainty before going into that mess.
Which is one of those moments where you really have to pause and appreciate the plot twist there. Doug Ford, standing in Texas, saying the magic word is certainty and then practically endorsing the usefulness of a stronger Carney government without quite saying it in those words, well, that's a bit like watching a guy insist he's neutral while clearly handing one team a better stick.
He was careful, but the point was obvious. Ford said everyone wants certainty in both countries before these negotiations, and he's not wrong about that part. Trade talks with Trump are not normal trade talks. It's like negotiating with a baby that's always having a tantrum.
And that connects directly to ordinary Canadians. When we talk about CUSMA, tariffs, and trade wars, it can sound dull, for sure. But it's not dull when you live in Windsor and your job depends on the auto sector. It's not dull when steel, aluminum, lumber, or auto parts get hit. It becomes paychecks, prices, and whether businesses hold back on investment because they don't know what madness is actually coming next.
Now, this doesn't look like a normal mid-cycle protest moment either. Historically, governing parties often lose support in by-elections. That's the pattern. Harper saw it, Trudeau saw it, and the Liberals got walloped in some 2024 by-elections when public frustration with Trudeau was boiling over. But the argument here is that this is a different environment now. Trudeau is gone, Trump is back, and Carney has stepped into a political climate where stability suddenly has market value.
And that's the key shift here. Last year, Voting against Liberals, so, felt like a way to tell Ottawa you were fed up. This year, for a lot of people, the question is much different. It's not how do I send a message, it's who do I trust not to fumble the steering wheel when the road is icy.
And the polling suggests the Liberals are benefiting from exactly that mood. The numbers had the Liberals ahead among committed voters, with government approval sitting solidly above water. Now, that is not the profile of a government people are itching to punish. It's the profile of one they may be willing to keep in place because the alternative feels like unnecessary motion.
Yeah, which brings us to the ridings themselves. University Rosedale and Scarborough Southwest, well, they're both Toronto seats that look pretty friendly to the Liberals. Under normal circumstances, maybe one becomes a protest vote, maybe. But if the national mood is really this risk-averse, well, then those voters may just decide now's not the time to get cute and try that.
Terrebonne is the real drama. The Liberals won it by one single vote in the general election. One. Then the Supreme Court annulled the results because of an Elections Canada printing error in a mail-in ballot, which is pretty much the Canadian form of political chaos. It's not a coup, it's not a riot, it's an envelope problem.
But Terrebonne matters because it tells you whether the national mood is strong enough to overpower local history. The Bloc has deep roots there. Local dynamics matter. But if the Liberal argument is that Canadians want steadiness in a shaky world, then a place like Terrebonne becomes the stress test. If that message works there too, then this is bigger than just 3 races. It also tells you how much Trump has scrambled those normal rules. Concern about Donald Trump and his administration is back near the top of the list of the issues that are worrying Canadians. That means that the U.S. is no longer just foreign policy background noise.
And that is a huge deal, because once the United States stops being a stable backdrop and starts feeling like an external threat, voters behave differently. They do not necessarily become more ideological, but they become more cautious. They start asking who can keep the lights on, who can negotiate without blinking, and who is less likely to turn every serious issue into a campaign stunt.
And that's also why a majority matters more than it usually would. A minority government can still govern, well, of course, we know that, but it's slower, shakier, and more vulnerable to political games. If Canada is heading into difficult negotiations on CUSMA with Washington, a majority gives Carney more room to act without constantly checking whether the floor is going to collapse underneath him.
So the real question in these by-elections is not just whether the Liberals can pick up enough seats, it's whether Canadians are now voting from a place of caution that could shape politics for a while. I think this instinct to hold steady is really going to have an impact in the voting booth. And if that holds true, it changes more than one parliamentary math problem. It changes how every party has to talk to voters.
Because once voters are in that mindset, then those flashy protest politics, they get less attractive. Endless grievance gets less effective. People may still be angry, but they don't want reckless. That's a terrible environment for anyone whose whole pitch depends on keeping everybody agitated and then calling that leadership. Are you listening, PP?
Okay, here's the frame I want everyone watching to hold on to before we close. This is the big picture. Donald Trump has spent the past several months systematically testing the resolve of every trading partner and ally the United States has. He's tested Europe with tariffs. He's tested China with escalation. He's tested Canada with the 51st state rhetoric and a threat to gut CUSMA.
And in every single case, he was looking for the same thing. Who flinches? And who flinches? Well, a minority government flinches. Not because Carney lacks the spine, he certainly does not, but because a majority government has structural uncertainty built right in. It can fall. It can be paralyzed at home. It's managing opponents domestically at the exact same moment it's supposed to be fighting battles abroad.
A majority government doesn't have to flinch. It can respond. It can hold the line on retaliatory measures. It can commit to a negotiation position and stay there without worrying whether it survives question period on Thursday.
And when Trump's team looks across the table at Ottawa, they are running a calculation. That calculation includes how long can this government survive? Can we wait it out? Can we stall, escalate, and watch it collapse internally?
2 seats on April 13th answer that question. They say, this government isn't going anywhere. Make your offer. And that's why Washington is watching these 3 Canadian ridings. That's why 3 by-elections in Toronto and in a Quebec community most Americans couldn't find on a map are a story that goes well beyond Canada's borders.
So what do we think will happen? Well, our prediction is that University Rosedale and Scarborough Southwest, well, Liberals will take both of those pretty easily. The national mood is strong and the urban base is energized and committed in those ridings. That's the majority right there. That's the straightforward call.
I'm with you on that completely. University Rosedale actually used to be our riding, and it's very liberal central there. But then there's Terrebonne. Terrebonne is the bonus question. That's where we find out whether this liberal movement has genuinely cracked the Bloc's hold on Quebec, or whether local loyalty holds, even in a climate that should favor stability.
And if the Liberals sweep all 3, including Terrebonne, well, that's not just a majority. That is a mandate that cuts across every region of this country. That is Carney walking into the next conversation with Washington about CUSMA with something no trade negotiator can manufacture.
Political unity. We will know in 8 days, and we will be right here when those results come in, because this is not a by-election story. This is Canada deciding in real time how it responds to the most destabilizing force in North American politics in a generation.
So here's your question for today. Do you think the Liberals will sweep all 3 and send a united message to Washington? Or does Terrebonne hold for the Bloc and put a ceiling on how far this momentum actually goes?
Let us know in the comments, because what you say matters, and we love hearing the pulse of Canada.
And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and hype it so that we can reach more people with this message.
And if you want to support this channel and help keep this going, check out the pinned comment for links to our merch store, the A-Team, our Substack, and our Facebook group.
Thanks for watching, everybody, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.